Good evening. Hello. Welcome to Christ Church, First Christian Church, Bridgetown Forum. My name's Adam Phillips, and I'm the pastor here. And we started Bridgetown Forum last year to have conversations for the common good. Not just conversations, but ideally conversations that would inspire action for the common good. And so we've had people like Jim Wallace here to talk about anti-racism work. We just had Jenny Yang from World Relief, who helped us look at the political crisis in D.C. around refugees and immigrants. She was just on the NBC Nightly News last night. So tonight's, we had Matthew Vines last summer, a year ago this week, actually, to talk about God and the Gay Christian, his pretty monumental book. And so I'm really excited to have Paula Williams here and Matt Morris. Paula Williams is actually a renowned church leader in the U.S., worked with the Orchard Group for many years. And I remember when I was moving out here to plant Christ Church in it would have been late 2013, I was trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this inclusive church thing and not get in trouble? Well, I got in trouble, and you can Google about it. But around that time, a little later in the following year, I remember reading this blog post that went viral, especially in the church world, and that was Paula's post. And so it was just a reminder to me that we needed to go full throttle and be inclusive. That this isn't really a new idea for people that follow Jesus, but maybe one of the original ancient ideas of the way of Jesus, to bring people from all walks of life together and seek first what we might call the kingdom or the kingdom of God. So Paula's going to share a little bit, and then after Paula, so delighted to have my friend Matt Morris, who I'll introduce as well later. We're in for a special treat tonight. Thank you, Paula.
So I was a well-educated, successful, white American male. I was the CEO of a large Christian ministry. I was on the preaching team of 2 megachurches, one in Philadelphia and one in Denver. Spoke once a month at each of those churches. I've preached in 3 of the 10 largest churches in the United States. I was an editor-at-large for a Christian leadership magazine. I wrote a weekly column there. I was on television in 70 different markets around the United States. I taught in 3 different seminaries, 2 in the United States and 1 in Europe. I was successful. Thomas Merton said it's a terrible thing to try and climb to the top of the ladder of success, only to realize when you get there that your ladder's been leaning against the wrong wall. I was 3, maybe 4 years of age when I realized I was transgender. In my naivete, I thought I got to choose. I thought sometime before kindergarten, the gender fairy would eventually arrive and would say, "What are you?" And I would say, "Of course, I am what I am." And then all would be well. But alas, no gender fairy arrived. And I started school as a very tall boy. I wasn't particularly happy about that. You say, why didn't you talk to your parents about that? It's a fine question. My father was a fundamentalist pastor. My mother was more conservative than my father. That's a conversation that wasn't going to go all that well. So I just lived my life. I didn't hate being a boy. I just knew I wasn't one. I got to high school and I knew I was attracted to girls, so I started dating girls, except I would have this complication because I would date a girl and then I would also want to be the girl I was dating, which, just didn't make for the best relationships. And then I got a job as a disc jockey at a rock and roll commercial radio station because every 16-year-old gets a job as a disc jockey at a commercial radio station. Little did I know how much our culture is tilted in favor of affluent white American males. I didn't know that till I didn't have it anymore. And there's no way that well-educated white American males can understand it either because it's all they're ever going to know. I had no idea. But because I got that job as a disc jockey, I got a scholarship offer to the University of Kentucky in broadcasting, and I turned it down because I knew if I went there, I was going to have to deal with this. So instead, I took a scholarship to a Bible college. Good decision, right? There I met a girl I wanted to date and did not want to be. This was good. And we got married and had 3 kids, and I loved being a father. I adored being a father. My son and I, he's a pastor of an open and affirming church in New York City, had an article in the New York Times a week ago Sunday. It's worth reading. It's raw, it's painful. It's had an incredible response. But you can see in the art, I loved being a dad. But then my 3 kids grew up and left home, and my gender dysphoria came back with a vengeance. That's what they call it, in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, gender dysphoria. 0.3% of the population are diagnosed with gender dysphoria. There aren't many of us. It's really nice that the LGB population adopted us, because otherwise we would still be in obscurity. And the truth is, we don't know what causes it. We have a pretty good idea that it happens in the 2nd trimester of pregnancy. In the 1st trimester, our bodies are created gendered. In the 3rd trimester, our brains develop a connection to that gendered body, and we know that something happens in the 2nd trimester that causes a short in the system, so that the brain does not make a connection to the body that's been developed. We know, for instance, that if a boy's mother took DES, which was a drug given between the 1930s and the 1970s to stop miscarriages, that their sons have a 30 times greater chance of being transgender. Not 30% greater, 30 times greater. So my mother took DES, so we know pretty much, more than likely, that's what caused me to have it, but we really don't know what causes it. We know it's a difficult diagnosis because 41% of those with gender dysphoria attempt suicide. 41%, 6 times higher than the next closest diagnosis. It's difficult, it's hard, and it generally gets worse with the passing of time. I was going to try to get through my life as a male because I did not want to put my family through the pain that I have in fact put them through. It was my intent to try to make it, and I thought I could until there came this point in time. I was watching my favorite television show of all time, Lost. There's a period in the final season 6, where the protagonist of the show, Jack, comes to a point where he realizes he's been called by God to die. And the night I watched that show, I sobbed all night long, all the way through to dawn. I screamed and railed at God. Who do you think you are to make me this way? Who do you think you are to call me to this? Don't you know I'm going to lose everything? I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose my jobs. I'm going to lose everything. And all I heard was stony silence. But I knew I had been called. And you reject the call of God at your own peril. Early in life, we're busy building resume virtues. We're slaying dragons and building kingdoms and amassing fortunes. But we get to the point in life where that's not working anymore. And we no longer are interested in those resume virtues, and we start focusing on eulogy virtues. We stop looking outside ourselves for our sense of satisfaction in who we are, and we look deep inside our own soul. We find we have fewer friends, but deeper friendships. We find that we're not nearly as concerned about being right as we are about being in relationship. And we realize that when we're called by God, you're going to reject that call at your own peril. Joseph Campbell used to talk about the hero's journey. It's common to every single culture and every single age, every language group, every ethnicity. It always has the same elements. There's an ordinary person who's called onto the hero's journey, onto the road of trials. But initially, the person rejects this call onto the road of trials because, hey, it's the road of trials. But then a spiritual director comes into their life, a Yoda-type person, that gives them the courage to leave the tribe and go on to the road of trials. And they accept that call. And then it gets worse when they go into the deep, dark cave. It's what Dante was talking about at the beginning of the Commedia, the Divine Comedy, when he said, "In the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in a dark wood where the true way was wholly lost." It's what John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. And you're in that deep, dark cave, and you don't think you'll ever get out. And finally, there comes that day when you see the light in front of you at the end of the tunnel, and maybe this time it won't be an oncoming train. And it's not, and you find yourself back on the ordinary road of trials, and now it's no big deal. And finally, on the hero's journey, you get to the great prize, the Holy Grail. But even then, you're not done. Now it's your responsibility to bring that back and to give it as an offering to those from whom you departed. Then you are free to move on. Now, the truth is, all of us are called onto the hero's journey. The question isn't whether we're called or not. The question is, do we accept that call? I knew that night I had been called, and I knew that I would accept that call, and I knew what was going to happen. So I told the organization I had been with that I was transgender. Within 7 days, I was gone. I'd been with that organization for 35 years. I'd taken their budget from $167,000 to $4 million. I'd taken them from starting churches in the metropolitan New York City area to starting churches worldwide. Had never had a bad review, gone in 7 days. Gone from the magazine in 7 days. Gone from television, 7 days. Lost every one of my jobs because in 21 states in the United States, you can't lose your job for being transgender unless you work for a religious corporation. Then you can be fired in all 50. When I first came out, there were 65,000 page views on my blog that very first day. It's Paula Williams, by the way. It's gotten really big again since the Times article last week. 65,000 page views on my blog, and they were really, really pissed. In the time since I transitioned, I probably knew within my religious world maybe 6,000 to 10,000 people by name. To date, I've heard in a positive way from about 50 of those people. I've met, I think, probably about 20, and I think we're up to 10 that I've met more than once. Now, of my non-evangelical friends, you know how many I lost? None. Not one. None. My doctorate's in pastoral counseling. You know how many of my clients I lost? None. Not any. What's the difference? E.O. Wilson is a sociobiologist who taught at MIT and at Harvard, won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, so he's kind of smart. And he helped the world of sociology understand that the basic social unit of our species is not the nuclear family, as most of us might have thought. The basic social unit of our species is the tribe. And he identified 9 species that are different than the rest as a sociobiologist. There are 9 species that don't only have the selfish gene that Dawkins would talk about, but they have a second gene, a tribal gene, where these 9 species will sacrifice themselves for the sake of the well-being of the tribe. And he said 8 of these 9 species have evolved in such a way that when an enemy comes into the camp, they unite, they defeat the enemy, life goes on. But he says the 9th species has unfortunately developed to believe it needs an enemy for the tribe to survive. And so where no enemy exists, they create one. Guess which one of those 9 species is us? And Wilson says if we don't get a hold of that, we lose the species, and likely we lose the planet because of the power of that species over the planet. Well, the anthropologist philosopher René Girard took it a step further. Girard studied leadership structures within those tribes and said over the eons, the leaders of the tribes discovered the best way to retain their power was to create enemies inside the camp. Because if there are enemies within the camp, it's a bad time to switch our power structures. You need to leave me in charge because we've got to root them out and maybe even build a wall or something like that. And so they created scapegoats that did not exist to maintain their positions of power. So I could, in fact, take personally what has happened to me, but in fact, it's what tribes do. Create enemies where they don't exist and create scapegoats within the camp who must be driven out. But here is where I stake my claim. Girard got himself in a lot of trouble with the world of sociology over this one, and philosophy and anthropology. He was studying all the meta-narratives, all the world views, the great big stories that explain the meaning of life. And he said all of the meta-narratives were written by the victors. All the meta-narratives were written by those who won the wars, by those who were in power, save one. There's one meta-narrative written from the perspective of the victim. One and only one, written from the perspective of the vanquished. It's Christianity. And he says the tragedy is the religion that developed from that meta-narrative has become just one more tribe creating enemies where they don't exist. But he said if we could get back to the teachings of the scapegoat, if we could get back to that core, there's hope for humanity. I believe it's true. And I believe we see it taking place. Even now I have hope. In 2008, 26% of evangelicals were supportive of marriage equality. In 2015, 36% of evangelicals are supportive of marriage equality. But in 2015, 51% of millennial evangelicals are supportive of marriage equality. You know, the church has never allowed itself to get that far behind the culture at large. Eventually it comes along. And I'm convinced we're going to see major changes over the next 10 years. And in the meantime, I'm glad to speak because I know embedded in my identity are responsibilities. The best way to bring about change is to put people in close proximity to one another. And I know if they get in close proximity to me, they may not like me, but it won't be because I'm transgender. It'll be for some other reason. They find out I'm a relatively normal person, like we're all relatively normal people. And so I speak because we've got a responsibility to tell the world that we are all loved. So my favorite poet is Mary Oliver, and depending on the week, this is my favorite poem. The Journey. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. One day you knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. Though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. "Mend my life," each voice cried. "Mend my life, mend my life." But you didn't stop. You didn't stop. You didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, little by little, little by little, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds. And there was a new voice, a new voice, a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Thank you.
Matt Morris is an American producer, singer, songwriter, and seminarian. And I'm so excited to have him here tonight. He's going to share a song, and then we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. So, thanks, Matt.
I normally don't speak before a song. Some people tell you this is how the song is written, and I'm always one of those people who's like, oh, I hate when people do that, but I'm going to do that right now. You may or may not be familiar with Bishop Karen Oliveto in the Methodist Church. Some of you may be aware that right now the Methodists are working through some stuff together, to put it really nicely. And she has found herself at the center of it as an out lesbian ordained bishop in a church that's not super happy about that. And I am a student at Iliff School of Theology. which is a Methodist school. I'm an Episcopalian, but they've got an Anglican studies program, long story. But I'm there. And I was there when Bishop Oliveto was going to come to preach. This was the week that they were going to decide whether or not she would remain a bishop. So it was tense. And I was, again, the Episcopalian among the Methodists, and we've had this conflict in our church and our tradition, and so it felt quite close and familiar. But I was slightly outside of it and was asked if I would contribute to the worship service in some way. And so I wrote this song for her and for this community of people, and I guess in a way for me too.
I'm made in the image of love, in the image of the one who delivered me. Hallelujah. I'm made in the image of love, and I know the day will come when we all are free. Well, you may not see the beauty of my story, and it's easier to lock me out than know me, but I have caught a glimpse of heaven's glory, and it looks like my wounded body raised. I'm made in the image of love, in the image of the one who delivered me. And I know the day will come when we all are free. Hallelujah. Well, we may be afraid of separation, but we're the people of God's liberation. Yes, we are. Just open up your heart to revelation. Ooh, you might discover the Spirit say that I'm made in the image of love, in the image of the one who delivered me. Day will come when we all are free. Hallelujah. Hey. Well, I have caught a glimpse of heaven's glory, and it looks like my wounded body raised. Said I'm made in the image of love, in the image of the one who delivered me. Said hallelujah.
Amazing. I met Matt a couple years ago. We were working, he was mostly working on it. I was just trying to do what we could on some houseless work here downtown, especially a veterans shelter that was meeting at First Congregational Church and working around. We have a huge housing crisis, if you're not aware. And we were a ramshackled church on life support, basically, when you came and talked to us in this room. Now we moved to the main sanctuary. And this was a few weeks after we met, and I said, man, you have a lot of Twitter followers. and he was like, yeah.
It's a thing.
And then I went and Googled Matt and saw him singing on Ellen with Justin Timberlake and realized, oh gosh, I'm an idiot.
No, it's not like a thing. I mean, it's a thing, but it's not a thing.
Yeah. But that's why I love you, Matt, because you're a neighbor and you're a friend, and you are offering your gift to the world. So thank you for that song.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So yeah, how did you get from all of those things to Iliff Seminary? Like, what's that story about?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I have performed and made music in some form or fashion for my entire life. I was speaking with somebody quite recently, a friend of mine who is a priest in the Episcopal Church here in Portland, and we were talking about how he suspects that there are a lot of people who go into ministry who are actually really what they really want is to be like stars, like want to be like performers. There's this weird relationship there. I have been a performer in some capacity for my entire life, and I am just now at 38 starting to kind of come around to being open and out about the fact that like ministry is where I really I feel like I am most fully myself. But I grew up with in a musical family with musical parents, and was writing songs young and performing quite young, and so it's always looked like a particular trajectory. And which is a sort of strange and unusual one. Yes, I did perform on Ellen. Yes, I've done some of these sort of really amazing big things. And I have friends who do ridiculously kind of astronomical big things. And I've always sort of been like, if this line right here is like, if this is the music industry and this is the church, like I'm like right here at all times, which has made it kind of strange, I think. For people on both sides of the line to really understand who I am in what I'm doing in either space. In the music space, they're like, you talk about Jesus a lot, or I'm writing in songwriting sessions. Sometimes I get, it's a little preachy. I'm like, I preach. It's actually something I love to do. And then in the other side, there's the idea, I mean, depending on what sort of church you're a part of. I mean, there are some, like I said, I'm an Episcopalian. I think evangelicals and sort of like the variety of post-evangelical folk blur a line between performance and ministry that makes it kind of even more confusing to know, like, am I just at a good free show right now? Like a free show that has a lot of weird emotional entanglements? Or is this church? Do you know what I mean? And when you walk in and the priest and everybody are investments and you're like, oh, this is church. It's weird, and for some people they're like, why are you wearing all of these things? If you're not a part of any kind of Catholic tradition. But I'm going off on a tangent.
No, I think that's really.
How did I get to Iliff? That's what you wanted to know.
Yeah.
When I was down here at First Congregational. After having been a part of the Episcopal Church for a very long time, responding to a call to see what congregationalism was like with Reverend Michael Ellick, and to do some direct work with people who are experiencing homelessness in Portland and houselessness. I was doing this once weekly gathering, which was kind of like a discernment group. He basically established a discernment group for us called the Wayfarers, and we got together with one another and talked about the work we wanted to do in the church, and we talked about where we felt called. And in the midst of that process, I realized a couple of things. One, I was not a Congregationalist. I was the Episcopalian in the room. Like, I knew it. For the assumptions that I was bringing, the questions that I was asking was also contextual to that. And then 2, I felt like, oh, this is actually what I'm called to do. I need to figure out how to do that, and maybe seminary is a good place to start. So I went through the whole process of applying to Iliff School of Theology, which is back in my hometown of Denver, because I knew some people who went there, and then after I was accepted, I was like, I should probably go back to my people. Like, I should go back to the Episcopal folk and try to figure out how to blend these things together. So I've just finished my first year, and I am now in the official discernment process in the Episcopal Church, which, for those who never heard anything about it, it's long and very complicated. And I cannot say I am becoming a priest, because that's like 3 steps down the line from being able to say. No one says that actually until they put the collar on, basically. But I am in a process of discerning in my community what ministry looks like and how my gifts might be able to sort of grow into the church, how we might be able to be in closer relationship in this way.
I think the performance and church blending and fuzzy lines is apropos. I mean, we just had Rob Bell here a month ago, and
he's like a famous Christian.
He's a famous Christian, and his vestments are skinny jeans and a cool jacket and hair, and it's awesome, but it was also like, is this spoken word? Is this comedy? It's, it was just different. So I think there's something to that. And but did you grow up Episcopal?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I was baptized a baby in the Episcopal Church, spent a lot of my early teens or all the way up until sort of teenage years when I started to perform. I was in church all the time. I was an acolyte. I was involved in it. It's so interesting, this idea of like the skinny jean vestments, and not just Rob Bell. I don't know Rob, but that I know what you're talking about. You're like the hip vestment, like the ordinary clothes vestment. One of the things that I've really appreciated about going back into a church that has these vestments that they've carried along, these traditions, is that it neutralizes the idea of the famous Christian in a way that I think is actually really important. One of the things that I think is an outgrowth of the evangelical culture is a kind of Christian guru thing. And I didn't know this as much until I went to Wild Goose a couple of years ago. And
what's Wild Goose?
Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina, which is hot and sweaty, and a lot of people from a variety of traditions, many post-evangelicals, people who identify themselves as progressive in some way, whatever that means to them, are having conversations about justice and experiencing music and doing art and all this stuff. And I came to do a little bit of performance and to maybe do a workshop or two. I was involved with the liturgy right off the bat. And there were other people who are clearly famous Christians who were in that space. I was like, oh, that's I know what the whole fame machine looks like. And this is what it looks like here. This is what you guys are doing here. And when people were putting that onto me, I'm like, oh, I'm not a famous Christian. That's not, there's a bit of a disconnect there. I mean, I was hardly a famous secular person, aside from those 3 things I can tack onto my bio. But yeah, I have weird feelings about it. I like church traditions that neutralize fame because they remind us in some ways, even if they're hierarchical churches, that like ours, with bishops and priests and all these different ways of ordering themselves, they are reminding us that the work that is to be done in Christian community is done in community, and is not simply people following the most charismatic person in the room, because that's dangerous. The next most charismatic person can disrupt whatever kind of community was established. And I love that about the Episcopal Church too. What we do is we come together and it's super traditional. For as much shade as people throw Catholic-esque or the Episcopal tradition for not being biblical, for not being we read a lot of scripture, we tell the stories a lot. People preach on those stories. We sing old, sometimes really tired hymns that are, and we dig into our theology together, but then we focus on the Eucharist in a way that, again, makes it not about us as individuals over other people, but as part of a collective community that's dependent on one another. This is helpful. I actually really do love my tradition.
So, yeah, I mean, we do weekly Eucharist or communion at Christ Church and First Christian Church. It's
awesome.
Part of the Disciples Christian movement
Cool.
tradition. But, we're probably more on the frontier side of church history, the more revivalist side of church history, and some of us evangelical, post-evangelical. You were saying something about some of the questions you bring and some of the framework and the way you see the world as an Episcopalian. Say a little bit more about that.
Well, it's tricky, actually, because there are ways in which I think, because I've been formed in a liturgical church that orders parts of its worship and that has centered the Eucharist, I bring a lot of that into my sense of what worship looks like. And I'm a performer who's been on stages and who understands in a way, what's happening when evangelicals have their hands up in the air and they're doing worship like this, right? Because Episcopalians are not doing worship like this. It's not happening, really. At least most Episcopal churches. Some, but they are not traditional Anglican-ish churches. I found, also out of the Wild Goose experience, there are parts of me that there are parts of me that feel a little more like a little Baptist-y, a little evangelical, in the way that I want to, like, when I catch something and all of a sudden I'm like in that space, that runs contrary to like the British culture of the Episcopal Church. So like when I'm in evangelical spaces, I'm thinking about certain aspects of the sacredness of the space or the kinds of things that we're doing. What is the liturgy of this thing? And sometimes when I'm in Episcopal spaces, I'm like, can we catch the Spirit already? You know what I mean? Most of my life, this line I was talking about here and being on both sides of it, that's actually, there are all kinds of sort of language around, like mestiza is a sort of like, I am in between things as a part of sort of both my identity and my experience of church is that I kind of am never one thing fully. I occupy those spaces to be a bridge between things. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's great. That's great. So we're coming at the end of Pride Month. This is a conversation tonight on inclusion. How do you come to that story? If you like, share
On the idea of inclusion.
Inclusion.
I feel weird about inclusion.
Yeah.
And it's
open and affirming.
I feel
however
weird
you want to
about
talk
all
about
of
it. Pride.
I have so many weird feels about it. It's good. I'm glad that there are people who are like, we're not going to throw you out of here. Like, that's awesome. I think the idea of movement towards spaces that are less exclusive is important. I think the idea of Christian churches becoming inclusive continues to center certain aspects of heteronormativity and the culture that had originally perpetuated exclusion without being really inspective and critical about how exclusion, as we heard, is sometimes built into the fabric of how that group is itself. And so I think there have been interesting political moves to take the gay rights movement towards something that could get bigger mass appeal. And I think that that's been helpful in some ways to some people and not to others. It has not benefited everybody in the LGBTQ world equally. There has not necessarily been, for example, a nice feminist intersectional analysis of how this movement has evolved. This is like me talking sort of around the queer stuff, but because that's all so messy and complicated, I feel like parts of it have been reduced to the simple idea of inclusion or welcoming. That was language in the Episcopal Church used a lot. We're welcoming. What does that mean? Does that mean I can be in your space? That's interesting. I think that it's valuable to allow the voices of the marginalized, the people on the margin of the margins, to be informing our theological vision. Not to be brought into the center in a way that continues the status quo, which marginalizes, but to recognize that there are certain perspectives. I love this idea Paula said, listen to the teaching of the scapegoat. I think that's amazing. I think that the problem of scapegoating is still present. But what I think is true in that is that there are things about the margin of the margins that reveal the flaws of the entire system at the center. And that's something that queer people bring as theologians, as ethicists, theologians, liturgists, pastors, pastoral caregivers, not as people who can then just be included in like the heteronormative spaces. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. I think it's complicated. Because in order for there to be, it's just very complicated. I think a lot of Pride is complicated. I had a very weird Pride weekend because I went to Pride. I didn't march, and a lot of my Episcopalian folk did.
Yeah, they were right behind us in our. Yep.
And what was interesting about it too is that there were a lot of queer ordained people who were marching, but you had a lot of people who were saying, "Thank you so much, thank you." That's become a thing. Thank you for not being the ones who throw us out. Thank you. And some of the priests were like, I'm super queer too. And so there's even a disconnect, I think, between the idea that there are queer Christian leaders who are holding communities together and witnessing it. They're not having this conversation of whether or not they can belong there. They're doing the work. The work has to be done. So the conversation about can we let them do the work is the wrong conversation as far as I'm concerned. It is the conversation that has to happen in certain traditions because that's actually just where they are in their evolution and in their life cycle. They have to have that conversation. I am not having that conversation because in my tradition, those conversations happened 15 years ago. So I have to put this all into perspective and allow... I get fiery about it. And I think that it's good that it's happening. I think it's important that it's happening where it is. And I think people need to be in their lane and have that conversation in their lane with their people. Wherever you are with your people, where, whatever kinds of conversation, like you might not be able to talk about a complicated, critical, feminist, intersectional unpacking of their tradition if they're still having that first conversation of like, can we let you come to our coffee hour? Do you know what I mean? But all of these conversations are important for where they are. Pride was weird for me because it felt really corporatized. I felt like I was at a Nike festival. I felt like the rainbow flag. I felt like it wasn't. There were so many layers of it that felt weird to me. And
it seems like it's really evolved in the 3 prides that I've been to in a row. It seems like it's rapidly gotten a little bit more corporate as you're.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Like I saw somebody post on Twitter where I do spend a little bit of time, a little screenshot of YouTube with a little rainbow flag next to their logo, and they're like, "Oh, that's so cute, YouTube. Remember when you used to ban photos of people coming out because you said it was explicit content? Nice flag, though." Like it's weird. Like I get like this is part of me generationally as that kind of like cusp between the Gen Xers and millennials, who I'm both hopeful and like super not hopeful and cynical at the same time. I'm like a cynic with hope.
Do you know we're called I'm the same. We're the Catalano generation. Jordan Catalano, My So-Called Life. Jim, it's weird. You should Google it. It's weird.
Wait, who played him?
I don't know. Who played him? Jared Leto?
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I know.
I feel appropriately conflicted about that. Why couldn't we be named after...
Well, they also call it the Jimmy Carter generation because we're all born in that same 4-year window that everyone wants to forget about.
So like I have the ability to speak hope into the sort of situation, but then I'm also hypercritical, I think, about the things that no one wants to... No one seems to be looking at clearly. So that's how Pride was for me.
Yeah. One more question, and then maybe you can do another song.
Sure.
So last time I saw you, we were both sort of like holding our heads over coffee like in February because that orange man with the weird hair had just been inaugurated named Donald Trump. So I felt like we really got nowhere in that conversation about like what do we do? It was more like what do we not do? Oh shit, it's bad. Like that was the kind of vibe I took away, and that's kind of where a lot of us needed to be, and it was good. As a person of faith, as an artist, as a human, like, what do you think we need to do in this next season ahead with President Trump?
Wow. So I think of myself as human and then person of faith and then artist. I think sort of finding ways to feel human in the current climate, I think are helpful and require creativity and resilience to not feel like humanity is stripped from me because everywhere I look, there's just the sort of the viciousness or ugliness or or deceit or megalomania. I could go on. And I have to find ways to regulate my participation. Like I had ideas about how I was going to participate. Oh, I'll write some songs about this, and then I would just sit there in front of my computer like, what is the world? And so I think finding ways to take care of yourself is really important. Community is really helpful with that. Like grounding yourself in your practice of community is helpful. I think that different faith communities have different work to do if they wish to be if they wish to push back against what is happening and what will continue to happen, particularly in the name of sort of like glossed over with Christian faith, like with the veneer of Christianity. And with, I mean, none of us can say, if someone claims that they're a Christian, well, they're a Christian. If we get into the business of saying, well, you're not a Christian because, well, then we're all participating in that same thing, where, especially as a queer person, who has been told that you can't be a Christian. Like self-identity is real. So if entities and big groups of people who have the military behind them identify as Christian, well, as paradoxical as that seems, they're Christian. And so I think that Christians have specific work to be done in the sort of Trump era around several things. Establishing an ability, a keener ability, particularly for those who find themselves leaning left in things culturally or politically, to speak out morally in a way that's grounded in your faith. And not to be simply, this is another part of the sort of inclusive piece. A lot of times I feel like the progressive side of things has been defensive. It's a matter of like coming up with good defense around a religious defensiveness toward conservatives on the right. And what I think needs to be coming up from all sides is like a religious conviction about justice and a religious conviction that's grounded in compassion, that pushes back against the things that are happening, the vicious things that are or can be or will be happening, especially those in the name of Christianity. So I think that's a particular work that has to be done in Christian community. I think that white evangelicals need to like have a come to Jesus moment around their participation in sort of white supremacy as a logic, and I don't mean just the people who are active white supremacists, but I mean the logic of white supremacy. And if that's a sort of like, what does that mean? Like Google's your friend, and there's like so many great ways into that conversation. The fact that white evangelicals helped in such a significant way to elect this president means that there's deep theological conversations that have to happen, and that will be happening for years, especially if at the end of 4 years, there's another 4 years, or if we make it to the end of the 4 years with the same sort of situation that we're in now. But that doesn't leave out people. I mean, it's not just white evangelicals, it's a lot of white people in a lot of different, even mainline Christians, who have to kind of start to do to do deeper thinking on this, and that's hard work that our traditions are not really set up to have us do. Like status quo religious traditions are not revolutionary religious traditions. If you can't, like, they don't just become that. Like you have to, like, there has to be a revolution birthed within it. And that's what I mean when I mean like stay with your people and do your work with your people, on the terms of your people, in the language of your people, speak the language of your people. It's like Pentecost. I preached on Pentecost, which was awesome. And part of what came to me in that was, like, speak the gospel in your language. Queer people, speak the gospel in your language. White people, speak the gospel in your language. And find out where, in what parts of those identities, either the ones that you have or the ones that have been laid onto you, i.e. the parts of what it means to be white that have it like made people into a way that makes them complicit in things that they wouldn't choose to be complicit in. Speak into that with the gospel. Do that work. Like it has to be a prayerful work. I don't know what that looks like for everybody, but I feel that in my bones that that's work that has to be done if we're going to make it through this.
Thank you.
That makes sense? Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do that song.
So Matt will do another song, and then we'll bring Paula and Matt back and take some questions.
So I'm going to do the thing I hate twice. tell you about this song. I was at my church at St. David of Wales. I asked our rector, Curlin Richter, if I could do this practice. We are a liturgical church who use the Revised Common Lectionary, so we are part of all of these traditions who use the same scriptures every Sunday. Catholics, Lutherans, I see a lot of nodding heads, so you all know what this is, but having preached several times, I found I really loved taking these different readings and like synthesizing them in and finding what the thing we could speak about, what I could preach on. I thought it'd be cool to write a song like that and to maybe write some songs that way. And so during the season of Epiphany earlier this year, I did that. This is the first one I wrote. It was around the gospel was the Sermon on the Mount. There we go.
He went up the mountain to plead his case, to let the hilltops hear his voice and the people see his face. He sat down in the dirt like a backwoods preacher, and when he opened up his mouth, even the mountain itself became a believer. And he said, "Blessed are the poor, this is their kingdom. And bless the pure of heart, for they will sing. Blessed are the meek, this is their world beneath your feet. So bring your hunger and your thirst and follow me." I could hardly believe him or the things I heard. I worked too hard all my life not to get what I deserve. Man, this is America, the land of the strong. You gotta grab hold of those bootstraps and prove that you belong, or you won't last long. Then he said, "Blessed are the ones who show you mercy, and bless the pure of heart, for they will see. Blessed are my kin who offer peace and turn from sin, 'cause you can't have a war to win and follow me. Oh, blessed are the poor, this is their kingdom. And bless the pure of heart, for they will see. Blessed are the meek, this is their world beneath your feet. So bring your hunger and your thirst. Don't hold back, I've seen the worst, and I know just how bad it hurts. So follow me." I sat down at the table and offered me a chair. I didn't think I would belong, but he was glad to see me there. He took a tortilla and some cold fruit wine, and with an ordinary meal, he showed me heaven could be mine once we both died. Blessed are the poor, this is their kingdom. Bless the pure of heart, for they will see. Blessed are the meek, this is their world beneath your feet. So bring your hunger and your thirst and follow me. Oh, blessed are the ones who show you mercy. And bless the pure of heart, they will see. Blessed are my kin who offer peace and turn from sin, 'cause you can't have a war to win and follow me. Blessed are the poor.
I have a question for Paula, but before I ask, Paula, did you have anything to kind of respond to what Matt was saying or piggyback on anything that he maybe talked about in his conversation?
I can tell you go to Isla.
Is that a thing?
It's a thing. It's a school very known for its great concern about kind of deconstructing all of our racial prejudices. I mean, it's one of the things I really appreciate about the school is recognizing how you know one of the things, if you're a trans person, I lecture a lot at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and I was a couple of weeks ago I was there, and you often get this question: do you feel 100% like a woman? I said, I feel 100% like a trans woman because I will never live long enough to lose my male privilege. Never will. And so much of what you're talking about, just we're lifelong learners. And how do you recognize you're always getting it wrong, but still have the courage anyway to try? You know? Yeah.
Questions for Matt or Paula?
Just about language and how can we keep up with what different groups want to be called, because we run into all kinds of people and they have trouble with the word queer, for example. I don't know, just sometimes confusing to know what people want to, or how we can refer to people without being what I took you to say, like, we treating you in a funny way. You're just another person, right? Or maybe I'm getting that wrong, but the language is a struggle for some of us.
I think a lot of that is because language is not adequate to express who we are. There are limitations to language. I think it's usually best just to follow the lead of the people that you're with. You know, what's their lead? I'll have people misgender me occasionally. The national president of PFLAG is one of my close friends. She never met Paul, but she misgenders me regularly. You know, she'll say he, and it's fine. I mean, it's absolutely fine. And I know it's because I lived for a lot of decades as an alpha male. You know, so it's the more work one has done, I think, the more grace and mercy you're willing to have. I think my perspective on it, from my perspective, is you just try. You know what? For my son, the reporter from the Times called me last week, and he said, "Your son always says my dad, she." He said, "Are you good if we go with that?" I said, "I am their dad, and I'm she, so we're good with that."
I am a parent. I'm a step parent of an amazing non-binary trans kid. And they've taught me a tremendous amount about many things. And a couple of things that sort of piggyback some of what Paula's talking about is following the lead. And sometimes one of the things that they tell me that they do in just about any conversation they have with a new person is, "Oh, hi, what's your name? What are your pronouns?" The pronoun question. And for some people, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's some people like that is that's like the beginning. Oh, they? Cool, now I know. And we may slip up if seems to be a disconnect between the pronouns that they use and the ones we think they should use. But that's one thing. I mean, at churches, for example, practical thing that can be done at churches, a lot of churches have name tags. Gender pronouns are, he, him, she, her, they, them. They can be put on a name tag. That's a small, subtle cultural thing that speaks volumes to people. And then how do you identify is another question, which is something that a lot of us may not be used to asking. How do you identify? But for those who have done critical work around their identity, who've spent so much more time thinking about how they identify than we have in like the first few seconds of our conversation with them, they know. And they often, sometimes will love the fact that you've asked, oh, that's awesome, I identify as queer, or I don't, right? But I think developing the practice of learning how to ask those questions may help.
I think we have a question right here.
It's for Paul. How did your kids respond when you came out? Was it hard for them to accept?
Absolutely. For my son, it was extremely painful. He lost his father. And my girls, it was more of a delayed response for them. That first year they were incredibly supportive, and then they just kind of disappeared for a while. My granddaughters, I have 5 granddaughters who are all between 6 and 9 years of age. It took them about 15 seconds. I mean, it was just no big deal to them. It was so quick. But for my family, it's still tough. It's still tough. I was their father. You know, I worked with a lot of white male pastors, and one of them left ministry and went into the film business and runs a film production company, and he had me come soon after I transitioned to speak to their staff. And when he called me to ask me to come, he said, and pardon my French here, but he said, hey, you really fucked with me. And I said, well, get in line. He said, you are my only example of an alpha male who was gentle. And I thought, oh, shit, you're right. I was an alpha male and I was gentle. I said, what do I do with that? And my son said, you know, do I really know what it means to be a man? Do I know the example I had? It is really difficult for a family. I've had, in the last 10 days particularly, people from all over the world who are professionals, who are trans, who are writing me and saying, we want to go ahead and transition. We feel called to it, but there was a lot of pain in that article with your son in the Times. Because there's a lot of pain in it. It's not really ever okay. My kids lost their dad, and there was no memorial service. You know, I know the same things I knew before, but I am fundamentally different. Early on, I would say, I'm the same person, and my son would say, you are not. You are fundamentally different. And all of my counseling clients, all of them at some point or another within the first 6 months said, hey, we like you better now. I'm like, oh, was I so bad before? It's like, no, there's just something different now. It's like, okay.
All right, well, this question's for Paula. I never want to ask someone to relive gory details of a job loss, so whatever you're willing to share, like how did that happen? Did they just say 7 days it happened? Did they say it's because you're a woman now, or?
Right. Well, actually, at that point, I had not even said I was transitioning. I just said I'm transgender.
Did they see it, or what?
No one had a clue. I was very good at hiding it because it was my intention to go through my whole life without transitioning. For me, it was a very strong sense of call. It also, interestingly, was a very strong sense of call back to the church. When I first went to Highlands Church, my church, the very first Sunday I'm there, I had that same experience of, I just started bawling, and it's like, oh, come on, God, really? You would call me back to this after what this did to me? But within 2 months, I was preaching. And I'm getting ready to start a church, which is, I oversaw the nation's second largest church planting organization for 25 years. And now, all of a sudden, I'm starting a church again. I still believe in the church. I believe that Jesus is actually the hope of the world. And the fact that the church messes it up a lot, that's, it's what tribes do. Now, my understanding of Jesus is very different than what it was before. My understanding of Scripture is very different than what it was before. I don't think that Jesus came to earth to change God's mind about us. I think Jesus came to earth to suffer with us and to change our minds about God, to understand that we cannot stop, God can't stop loving us. So I've got a lot of grace for those people. They're big corporations that want to keep the money coming in. It's like, I understand that. It's inevitable. It's just how tribes behave. Did it hurt? Oh my goodness, yes. And there's been a whole new round of it because they're just really, really angry that that Times article was as well received as it was a week ago. They are so angry because my son and I are getting a lot of national attention, and they just are livid. And it's like, so I knew there would be another round.
Another question, yeah.
Thanks for coming, Paula. I had a question. Post-transition, what parts of yourself have you gotten to be introduced to that's been surprising? Like parts of your personality, have parts of your personality arisen that you've been surprised to meet? And what's that been like to see parts of yourself?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Oh, absolutely. The changes are, they're massive. And a lot of it is in fact social, because, I can't believe the difference. I have become stupid all of a sudden. I didn't know this, but I don't know anything anymore, evidently, because places I was always listened to before, now I have no credibility whatsoever. So like I was flying from LAX to Honolulu, and it was a horrible, horrible, horrible flight. And there was a woman next to me, and she said, I've never been in a flight this bad. And I said, I know, it's because we're on an A321, and actually a 321 has to burn off a bunch of fuel before they can get above the weather. She looked at me like I had 7 heads. A male flight attendant comes by. She says, why is it so terrible? And he said, we can't fly over the weather. And she's like, oh. And I said, wait, no. I just told you why we can't fly over the weather. And I could have told you a lot more about an A321, but now, if Paul had said that, she would have said, oh, are you a pilot? I mean, it is unbelievable to me how much I have become a second-class citizen. That's been a massive, massive change. If I write a book, there are a bunch of good books on trans stuff. Jenny Boylan's is probably my favorite. Joy Layton's is great on spiritual issues. Janet Mock, everybody loves Janet Mock. If I write a book, it's going to be the difference on experiencing life in America as a male and as a female. Because there's just no way that a successful white American male can understand how much the culture is tilted in his favor. And what it causes me to realize is, oh my goodness, there's no way I can understand how much, as a white female, the world is tilted in my favor. And my very dark-skinned Indian daughter and my African-American son-in-law say, uh-huh, they've known it all along.
Got a question right here.
First, thank you guys for coming. There's several of us here that go to an evangelical church that is just starting those conversations literally this week in the General Assembly that's going on. So while some of us have been thinking about just going ahead and starting to come here, it's been encouraging to hear you guys say, stay the course and help to move change forward. So just looking for some other thoughts from you guys on how we can continue to move the conversation forward just within our own space. And then secondary to that, I have a childhood friend who I really haven't been connected with except via Facebook, who 2 weeks ago, he's a married father of 2, came out as transgender and is transitioning, and they're going to stay married and try to make that work. But what kind of support from the outside would be helpful to him or to her as she's transitioning now?
Reach out to her and say, I'm going to get a lot of this wrong, and initially it's going to be weird because it is. I mean, it's weird. It's just weird. And if you're trans, you have to accept that people who've known you as a male, something happened not long ago at church at one of our staff meetings where somebody wanted to see a picture of a certain thing, and they're like, who's that? And I said, oh, that's Paul. And these people are all like, ooh, oh, 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 oh. No, and it's like, oh, that's because they only know Paula. And so it was just so weird for them to see this male, and it's like, oh, this is the opposite of what I got on the other side. So anyone who reaches out, like I said, I knew 6,000 to 10,000 people. 20 people reached out to me and met me, and 10 have met me more than once. Be one of those 10.
Yeah, Matt.
I don't know. I don't know your people. You know your people. Finding ways to value those relationships and try to like honor the dignity of the people. That's actually an interesting and challenging practice for me, to honor the dignity of people who are not honoring my dignity. That's my challenge. Talk about grace. You need grace? Lord, I need grace. Because having been one of the people who was hurt, the Episcopal Church has gone through its mess, right? And I felt like it wasn't moving fast enough, which may seem crazy to people who are like, y'all are 15 years ahead. I'm like, no, it wasn't cutting it. It wasn't there. It was too establishment. But those are my people. You know your people. Finding ways to honor the dignity. And while I say that staying in your lane or like being with your people is important, no one should be in a situation where they're like hurt or abused. Like where they're, if you're in a bad abusive relationship, get out the relationship. Like if it's an unfixable thing. And sometimes I think church relationships can, there's this idea that we're family, and so we have to stick together. And like I have chosen family, and family, and so if you find yourself in a place where it's untenable, it's okay not to be a part of that. But that dignity piece, I think, is important.
The word I would go with on that point is, once it feels toxic to you, if it's toxic, it's time to go. I think that's the.
We have time for one more question.
I'm curious, for both of you in your roles as leaders and future leaders in the church, and what are the traits that you both see from that are being needed for leaders in our faith communities going forward, given this new world that we live in, from both of your perspectives?
Henry Nouwen said the greatest leaders have always had the paradoxical strengths of great confidence coupled with great humility. Richard Rohr is one of my favorite theologians, and my church has a very close relationship with Richard. And so he came and spent the day with our staff in January. And he said, you're the church for the next 500 years. And so at our staff retreat last weekend, there was a lot of reticence about that, saying, seriously, we're the church for the next 500 years? And I said, well, we have Trinitarian leadership because we don't believe in one person in charge. We have egalitarian leadership. We are progressive theologically, and yet we are evangelical in our methodology. And there's probably 20 churches like that around the country. And so I said, can we own that without fearing that we become the next megachurch? I used to facilitate megachurch senior pastor retreats where you had like 100 of them together in one place. There are often issues. I know how to hire those people. I can tell you exactly what it takes to grow a church very large. It doesn't have much to do with what it takes to be like Jesus, but I can tell you what the elements are. With our staff, I want to say, I do believe we're the church of the next 500 years, because we are very clearly Christ-focused. We commonly say we take the Bible far too seriously to take it literally, but we do take it literally. And I believe that, but then the staff are so It's like, oh, but really, and it's like, oh, I think we need to have the confidence of owning this. That's what I'd like to see. Great confidence coupled with great humility. I think those are the great leaders.
I think that leaders in faith communities need to cultivate a deep and abiding belief in the presence and activity of God in the world. We need to believe in a way that is not simply a carefully constructed intellectual approach, but to give our full self into that. I actually don't know that there's anything I can do well enough to be able to do the things that need to be done alone. I don't think it's possible. And so I think for me, as someone who's exploring leadership, what that looks like, I'm reminded by the people closest to me, by my husband, by my friends, by my spiritual director, to be gentle with myself and to believe that God is actually moving in all of this mess, and to hone in my skills of discerning that movement, and then leave it up to what it is.
Thank you. How do we follow what you all are up to?
paulastonewilliams.com, and you'll every Tuesday morning there will be a blog, and you can pretty much follow me there, or follow me on Facebook at Paula Stone Williams.
I am not regular about blogging. I have so many conflicts in my mind about digital engagement, but that's part of my generational piece. But I do have a website. I've had several. MatthewDavidMorris.com. I write there periodically. I've been toying around with a idea of doing a lectionary writing, but I don't think it's going to happen. Twitter, @MattMorris. Facebook, /Matt Morris. I was on the early end of it. I got Matt Morris just about everywhere, so you can find me there.
And if you'd like to support Matt in his seminary journey.
Yes. Can I make a pitch?
Yes, please.
ILIF has this really amazing matching program. And so up to $4,500 donated by people who aren't also ILIF students or my husband, they'll match it 100%. So if you have a few dollars to spare, $5 becomes $10, $10 becomes $20, and so on. And it's at gofundme.com/seminary for 90s style, Matt.
Seminary for Matt on GoFundMe. Check it out. This is an event co-sponsored with Gay Christian Network, and Constantino's got a brief announcement. Come on down.
Thanks, Adam, just for hosting us, and Paula and Matt for. So my name is Constantino Calef. I'm the Director of Operations for the Gay Christian Network, GCN. And we're the largest LGBTQ Christian organization in the country outside the mainline Protestant denomination. So working primarily, interestingly, we work mostly evangelicals and Catholics. That was the origin of GCN, because tend to be the more conservative within the LGBTQ community. We exist to create community and serve the faith of LGBTQ people. You can find us on Facebook, Gay Christian Network. Our website is gaychristian.net. Our biggest thing we do is create events. We have a couple of events coming up. In October, we have the first GCN Youth Retreat for ages 14 to 19. It's going to be out in Pennsylvania at a camp. So that's October 13th to the 15th. And then our annual conference is coming up in January. It's going to be in Denver, January 18th to the 21st. That's kind of like our marquee event. It was here in Portland a couple years ago, and it's the largest gathering of LGBTQ Christians in America for sure, but we have some international presence as well, in average 1,400 to 1,500 attendees. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So Christ Church meets at 11:30 on Sundays. If you're looking for more traditional style worship, First Christian meets at 9:30. We actually have our next event on Monday. I know it's 4th of July weekend, but we're not all going to the coast. We have something called Public Theology. It's basically Bible study in a bar, and we will be talking about what it means to be a Christian in America. So some of these issues around citizenship will come up again. Monday night, we meet in the upper room, pun intended, at Century Bar on Sandy. And it's really exciting because Jules Bailey, who ran for mayor last cycle, will be joining us. So really interested to hear his take on faith and politics. Big shout out to the Christ Church crew that helped here tonight. Josh, Jake, Nicole, thank you so much. And have a good night.